what we're going to be looking at today is biomes. That is ecological regions on Earth. Okay? The reason we have these is because of climate and, of course, the factors that produce it. So what we're going to be looking at here is these ecological regions and their properties and how that's related to climate. What that's going to mean for you on a test is this. In a multiple choice question, I will give you a picture of the biome and a description of the biome, and then you will have to identify it. Okay, so I would say something like, I'd have a picture of out there, and I would say, okay, this biome has, harsh winters and has mild summers. Most of the precipitation is in the summertime, and most of the plants are scrubby grasses and things like that. Okay, what biome is this? A, tundra; B, taiga; C, prairie; D, tropical rainforest. Okay, and you would pick prairie. All right, everybody follow? Okay, so that's one of the things you'll be asked to do. The other thing you'll be asked to do is combine this with your knowledge of climatograms. So I give you a climatogram, and I ask you, what biome is this from? Explain why. Right? So you look at it and you look at, all right, well, I got lots of precipitation here and it's pretty even all the way across. Okay? And the temperature is even all the way across. Okay? Well, then it's probably a tropical rainforest. Okay? It's certainly not a prairie because we don't have even heavy precipitation all year round, and our temperature changes radically throughout the year. So it's definitely not for us. You guys follow me there? Okay? Those are the two things you're going to be required to do from what you learn in this lesson. All right? The first question on your test is basically the climatogram question. Okay? So you got to be ready to do that. All right. So here's the biomes of the world and their distribution on a map. First biome we're going to talk about is the tropical rainforest. Okay, so the tropical rainforest, okay, is the kind of light green color here, and you can see that it is pretty much an equatorial climate. You do not see any of that bright green color beyond the Tropic of Cancer, and only a tiny little bit of it below the Tropic of Capricorn. Okay? Yeah, the Tropic of Cancer is 23.5 degrees north, and this is 23.5 degrees south. Right? Because that's the tilt of the Earth. Anywhere between these two lines, the length of day barely fluctuates throughout the year because it's not affected by the Earth's tilt. Everybody follow? Okay. It's an equatorial climate. We're only going to find tropical rainforests in here. If we're not getting significant changes in sunlight throughout the year, then we're not going to have major changes in temperature throughout the year. Right? And being near the equator probably means that we're probably going to get a reasonable supply also of precipitation. That's not always true, okay? But it could be, especially if we're near, an ocean or things like that. All right. The second one we'll talk about is the savanna. Okay? The savanna is also an equatorial climate, so you can see there's some light brown here in South America, although a lot of that is man-made, okay, from deforestation of the rainforest. Okay? There's a lot of it naturally occurring in the safari kind of area here of Africa, right? So you're going to find lions and tigers, but not bears. Okay, things like that. All right, in that area, wildebeests, giraffes, all that kind of stuff. Okay, there's a little bit in Australia. Okay, but obviously again, not having the African wildlife, you'll find your marsupials and things like that. Okay, in that area there. Third one we'll talk about, true desert. Okay, true desert is like equatorial desert. So, all right, so we see, well, I shouldn't say equatorial, but true desert's really dry, right? We've got the Sahara, obviously, okay, right across the top of Africa, things like Morocco and Egypt and the whole Middle East, basically. Okay, we'll also see some in the outback of Australia here. There's also some creeping up into North America here when we're looking at like Nevada, Utah, okay, places like that. Mexico, a lot of Mexico is desert. Okay, we also have some here. Okay, what's this big white thing with the blue around it? They're kind of big. This is the Himalayas right here. Okay, so this is a rain shadow desert. Okay, remember we talked about how you can get a rain shadow desert? That's a rain shadow desert. It looks like if I was holding a flashlight here and this was three-dimensional, the mountains would be casting a shadow behind them, right? It's a rain shadow. Precipitation does not get over the Himalayas. They're kind of tall, okay? Kind of like 3 times taller than the Rockies are, right? They're kind of a big deal, right? But we also see that here, there's a bit of a rain shadow desert behind the Rockies as well, right? And there's rain shadow prairie, okay, where we are, right here behind the Rockies as well. A little bit of rain shadow desert down here, okay, in South America, and then obviously a lot in Africa, okay, a little bit here past the Caspian Sea and things like that. Okay, next one we'll talk about, extreme desert. We actually won't talk much about that because there's not much to talk about. Extreme desert is exactly what it sounds like, rocks and ice. Very dry, also very cold, which is why you see that color on the tops of very tall mountain ranges where you might only have glaciers and rocks and no plants or animals in that area. All right, a little bit up here in Greenland too, which is covered by an ice sheet, or at least most of it is. You have it here in South America on the tops of the mountains, and the one continent that is missing from this map. Antarctica. Good, no one said Atlantis. Someone said that the last time. The lost continent of Atlantis. No. Yeah, just in your imagination. Okay, so obviously Antarctica is down at the bottom of the world there, and it would be entirely that color, right? Because obviously it's covered in a big ice sheet. All right, next one, chaparral, which we also tend to call the Mediterranean climate. I can't imagine why. Is that most of it is here around the Mediterranean. So Italy and Greece and places like that are hot, dry, okay, kind of places, but not like deserts, okay? They're still, they just have a very unique climate, very unique types of plants live there. That's why you can grow lots of olives and grapes and things like that in those areas. That's the perfect climate for that. Thomas? I'm not so concerned about you labeling on a map, no, okay? But you are going to have to know them when it's a multiple choice question or you're identifying the climatogram. You have to know them, right? Okay, there's a little bit of Mediterranean climate here in like Southern California, Baja, that kind of area, okay? And there's a little bit here on the tip of Australia. I think this is where, this Perth? I can't even remember. Somewhere like, yeah, okay? And then there's a little bit here in South Africa as well. So they wouldn't be like exactly like this Mediterranean climate is, but they're similar in that they're hot and dry, and you can, the similar types of plants will grow. Temperate grassland, we call that prairie, okay? In Asia they call it steppe, but it's temperate grasslands, okay? That's where essentially the bulk of the world's food can be grown, right? That's where agriculture is going to occur, things like that. Obviously there's a big chunk of it throughout most of the Midwestern United States and the prairie provinces of Canada and even down into Mexico a little bit, and then much of Central Asia is prairie, all right? So we'll be looking at places like Mongolia and obviously Russia would have some, okay, things like that. All right, temperate deciduous forest. What does deciduous mean? Not so much fir trees. Fir are actually a conifer because they make cones. If you're deciduous, what do you do with your leaves? They fall. They do fall off. Deciduous, they do fall off. Okay, so if you have temperate deciduous forest, you have trees that lose their leaves, which is why, of course, most of the eastern United States and central Canada has that color on it. That's where maple trees, okay, can be found, oak and things like that, things that lose their leaves every year. Much of Europe, almost all of Europe, is really that color, but of course not so much anymore because the Industrial Revolution took care of a lot of that for fuel, okay, but it's still kind of supposed to be that color. But that's a very mid-latitude kind of climate. You basically don't see any except for a little bit of it here, okay, in like in New Zealand and Australia, but basically that's the only place in the southern hemisphere where you see that. It is very much a northern mid-latitude kind of a climate. Okay, and then we've got taiga. Okay, taiga is, if you've gone to Fort Mac, okay, that's, well, used to be, okay, taiga, okay, but that fire is a big deal in the taiga, right? And we saw just how much that can be a big deal this year, because the taiga is actually, believe it or not, for a forest, a very dry biome, okay? They get most of their moisture in the form of snow early on, okay, in either the spring or obviously through the winter, and then when it melts, it's dry and hot, okay, throughout the rest of the year. And in the taiga, we have some of the biggest fluctuations in temperature between winter and summer. Okay, it can be as cold as -50, and it can be as hot as +30. right? That's one of the widest ranges of temperature that there can be in a biome, and that's what creates those kinds of situations. But the biome is highly adapted to dealing with periodic fire because it's going to have it, okay? Almost predictably every few hundred years, okay? Almost predictably. And that's going to allow for the release of seeds and things like that, which we'll talk about when we talk about that biome, okay? And then we've got, so for the taiga here, you can see most of, once you get kind of north of Edmonton, you're going to be getting into the taiga, okay? Much of Russia is taiga, okay, like Siberia and places like that, okay? But then above that is the tundra, okay? The tundra is a Arctic grassland. It is so cold that trees can't grow because the soil only thaws within about an inch or two of the surface in the summertime, okay? They have something called permafrost, which can be a big problem for building structures and things like that. Once you get into the tundra, you don't see a lot of houses built with basements, right? Simply because the ground never thaws and it's easy to crack foundations and things like that. Also, if it does start to thaw, it can liquefy, and then it just, like, you get mudslides and stuff. So typically houses are built on just a frame or stilts. Yes. There is 24 hours of sunlight in the tundra right now because we are approaching the summer solstice. Okay, so yeah, the sun never goes down. So if you're a kid, it's awesome up there. I don't know what parents say now, but when I was a kid, it was like, hey, come back at sundown. Sweet, see you in August. Okay, yeah, okay, because it's going to be daylight for 24 hours for several weeks, okay, around that area. Of course, the drawback of that is if they say, come down at sundown in December, you're stuck at home for 2 months, because it's going to be dark and the sun never comes up, okay, in the other half of the year. So you got to watch out for that. All right. Does that sort of making sense to everybody? That's kind of the distribution of things. Obviously, there's much more land mass in the north of the world than there is in the south, so a lot more of these biomes are going to show kind of northern patterns. Okay, tropical rainforest. Anybody ever been to a place where there's tropical rainforest? Okay. If you've ever seen tropical rainforest, you know that our forest is completely different. Okay, tropical rainforest is unbelievably oppressively thick. Okay, you walk through the forest around here and you can actually walk through it. You can see between the trees. There's not a lot of undergrowth and things like that. In the tropical rainforest, there's layers of forest. There's canopy, and then there's like mid canopy, and then there's lower canopy, and then there's all these understory layers. Okay, it's very, very different, and it's very thick. It's easy to get turned around and lost in the tropical rainforest because unless you're in a place where your footprints will stay, which isn't always the case because lots of times there's flooding water or running water across paths and stuff where you're walking on plants all the time, so you don't leave footprints. Okay, it's very, very easy to get lost. My father and I found this out when we were in Hawaii at my sister's wedding. We decided we would go for a little hike in the rainforest, and it just closes in behind you. And you get turned around. It's not like here where you're like, okay, I'll just look up and find the sun and I'll know which way I'm heading. You can't see the sun through the canopy of the trees. Okay, it's really easy to get lost and turn around. We ended up being out there for like 6 hours, and we planned to go for about a 2-hour hike. Okay, the only way that it was a complete accident that we happened to encounter a road and were able to follow it. Okay, so it's easy to get turned around unless you carry a machete. And then you can leave a path of destruction that you can follow back to where you came from, okay? Which is why you typically see people in the rainforest carry one, okay? One of those big kind of rounded blades, okay, that you can use to cut brush away, which makes moving through the rainforest quite a bit easier as well. All right, the big thing with the tropical rainforest is that it's got to have a specific climate to produce this much plant life, and that is heavy rainfall and high temperature. Right? Those two have to be present in order for that to happen. So a climatogram of a tropical rainforest is going to have a shape very different from the ones you looked at when we did our climatogram activity. Okay? All the ones you looked at in the climatogram activity, the temperature line was a bell curve. Okay? That was highest in the summer and lowest in the winter. Tropical rainforest, it goes straight across. Temperature hardly changes at all. Okay? When we were in Hawaii, I was like, man, the best job in the world would have to be a meteorologist in Hawaii. Because he could go on holidays for a week and his job would be done. He'd say it's going to be 35 degrees, it's going to rain a little bit during the afternoon, and it's going to be windy. See ya. Okay? And he'd be right for like 7 or 8 days in a row. Right? It's very, very consistent, okay, the weather there. There's not a wet season and a dry season. There's no summer and winter. There's no seasonality period because they're so close to the equator. Now, the other thing you need to look at, the amount of rainfall. Okay, their driest month is 150 millimeters of rain. Okay, that much. When we had the floods in 2013, we got this much. Okay, like 200 millimeters in the month of June. And look what happened. Okay, that's their driest month. That's why it's always flooded in the rainforest. Okay, there oftentimes the trees grow right out of the floodwaters. Okay, the Amazon River, it doesn't look like a river up here. Okay, it's just like meandering swamp, right? That goes through, and it honestly runs right through the trees sometimes. Okay, it's hard to kind of tell where the banks are much of the year because there really aren't any. It's always flooded, and you can see mountains in the rainforest look different than mountains do here. There's no tree line. Right? Here in Canada, mountains all have a tree line based on temperature and the fact that it's too cold and dry above a certain altitude to grow anything. Well, here, the mountains are like a chia pet. Okay? As long as you keep them wet, anything will grow anywhere, including cliff faces. Okay? Like this stuff, even this big spire here is covered in plants. Okay? It's that wet that they can grow even on incredibly steep slopes. All right? Okay, so 13% of the Earth's land surface, unfortunately, that number might be a bit smaller now. It's a little bit old. There's a lot of deforestation going on in the rainforest. The big thing is there's no distinct seasonality. Okay, so like we said, the temperature line is flat. Okay, there's no winter or summer. High temperatures, high rainfall, high humidity. Okay, that's all stuff to look for on the climatogram. Okay, and then precipitation exceeds evaporation. That means more rain falls on the rainforest than can evaporate from the rainforest. That is a recipe for flooding. Okay? If more water falls in a place than can dry up, it starts to accumulate. Okay, and like we said, so there's a lot of logging that goes on in the tropical rainforest, and there's also a lot of clearing that goes on for agriculture. However, tropical rainforests are notoriously poor places in terms of agricultural production because, believe it or not, the soils in tropical rainforests hold almost no nutrients. Okay, what's that? Yeah, because it's always flooded, you have what's called leaching. So water sits on top of soil and the soil becomes saturated and all the minerals in the soil dissolve into the water. And then because of diffusion, they move up from the soil and into the water where they're less concentrated, and the water runs away with all of the nutrients, like a leech sucking it out. Okay, that's why it's called leaching. So it literally pulls all the minerals and nutrients out of the soil and washes them away. Okay, that's why you also very rarely see a part of the Amazon River that's clear. It's always kind of like a murky brown color, not like rivers up here that can run, you know, like really, really clear in the summertime. Okay. Okay, so like we said, soils, okay, they're typically characterized by intense weathering. That means they get eroded easily, right, by water, not so much by wind, but by water, okay? And the minerals get taken out by leaching, okay? Decomposition is very fast. What that means is if something dies, it's gone very, very quickly. Right? Up here in Canada, or if you go even further north, okay, like up into the Yukon or places like that, if something dies, its remains stick around for a very long time. We were talking about the climbers on Everest, okay, the other day. I can't remember which goes with this class. Yeah, right, and how they don't decompose there. It's too cold and dry. Nothing that can decompose things like mold and bacteria can grow there, right? Here, mold and bacteria and insects and other decomposing organisms are plentiful. Right? So a tree falls in the forest, it makes a sound, and then a few weeks later it's gone. Okay? It just decomposes that quickly, okay? Because of that warm temperatures, high humidity, high rainfall. Okay, so that's really all you need to remember about soils is they're not very good. Okay, and for agricultural purposes, I mean, they have this kind of bleached red-looking color, okay, that shows basically they have no nutrients. And so what happens, unfortunately, is the people that live there will slash and burn sections of the rainforest, grow crops there, and then the next year they'll have to slash and burn more because the soils will just crap out. Okay? After 1 year of growing crops, all of the minerals and nutrients in the soil will be exhausted, and they're not people who can afford to have, expensive fertilizers and things like that. So they cut down more forest and grow more food in another place. Okay? It's not that they don't know better. They're living a subsistence lifestyle. They have to grow their own food or they'll die. Okay, so it's a tough place to kind of make ends meet, right? In terms of being able to grow your own food, right? I mean, you look around, and you see all these trees, but there's not a lot of like edible plants so much in the rainforest. Yeah, there's some that produce fruit and things like that, but not on a large scale. And there's also in the rainforest very few large animals to hunt, okay, for food either. If you like eating bugs, then you're good, because there's lots and lots of those. Anybody ever eaten bugs? You should, at some point in your life, eat a bug. Okay? You haven't lived until you do. Okay? No, I mean, like, honestly, like, it's not so bad. Okay? You can actually buy like those seasoned crickets, stuff. Yeah, and they're good. Okay? They're not bad at all. You can bake them or deep fry them, yeah. Okay? You can get chocolate-covered ants. Chocolate-covered ants are actually quite good. Okay? Yeah. Lots, actually. Yeah. Once you get past the idea of what you're eating, they're actually not all that bad. Yeah, they're quite tasty, actually. And bigger ones, they actually start to be kind of like crabs and lobsters and stuff. Yeah. So, yeah, really, at some point in your life, put it on your bucket list. I'm going to eat a bug at some point, right? On purpose, not by accident. Okay? Yeah, they're not that bad. I'm not saying you have to eat them while they're alive. That's a completely different experience. Okay? That's not for everybody. Okay? You can eat them cooked or prepared. They're not so bad. But if you eat them alive, it's a lot different because they're squirming around in there. Yeah. 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 Grasshopper. Yeah. Crickets. Live. Mealworms. Yeah. Yeah, they're good. Yeah. Mealworms. They're like a larvae, not a worm. I haven't eaten an earthworm. No. I wasn't that kid. Okay. So back to soils here. Okay, back to soils. So we've got, soils like we talked about the other day are broken up into horizons. They're broken up into the A horizon, which is the top soil, the B horizon, which has lots of clay, and the C horizon, where all the rock and parent material is. In the rainforest, there's almost no topsoil, because that gets washed away easily in a flood. It gets eroded and it's gone, right? Even though there's lots of litter from the trees, leaves that fall off and things like that, again, it doesn't accumulate because it's always getting washed away. What does stay is the clay, because the clay kind of cements itself there and doesn't erode very easily, right? So again, very poor soil because there's not a lot of topsoil. Okay, tropical rainforest in terms of vegetation, right? This is ground level in a tropical rainforest. It's thick. Okay? It's nothing like around here. You can't see very far. It's really, really thick, and there's lots and lots of layers. Okay? Another thing that some tropical rainforest plants have are these snorkel roots. We talked about those back in the plant unit, right? Okay? That allow them to survive flooded conditions by acquiring oxygen for their roots above the water line. Okay, so there can be up to 8 different layers of vegetation from the ground to the tops of the trees in some parts of the rainforest, right? So very, very thick. Again, it's sometimes hard to see the sun and know where it is in the rainforest. And at night, the rainforest is a very dark place, right? Because the moonlight and the starlight does not, it doesn't illuminate much even around here where it's clear, okay? But imagine having a layer of plants over top of you. It's a very dark place, okay? And diversity. Diversity is huge, okay? Lots of diversity. In a Canadian forest, if you were counting the number of different species of trees, you could probably do it on one hand in most Canadian forests. In a tropical rainforest, there could be 100 different kinds of trees in 1 hectare. 1 hectare is approximately the area enclosed by the running track. Okay, 100 meters by 100 meters, okay, is a hectare. So 100 different kinds of trees in that area. In Canada, there might be 100 trees, period, not 100 different kinds in a 1 hectare. Okay, in the tropical rainforest, it's pretty dense. Trees are growing right next to each other in a lot of places. Okay, so extremely diverse. That's the big thing to remember there. Okay, the fauna. So that was the flora, the plants. This is the fauna, the animals. Okay, Lots of different kinds of animals, mostly bugs. Okay? If you do not like bugs, do not go on a vacation to the rainforest. You will not have a good time. Bugs are everywhere. Okay, so there's big scarab beetles, walking sticks, like praying mantis, and then there's lots of amphibians. Okay, like salamanders and newts and frogs and things like that that actually have to go back to the water to reproduce. Reptiles are somewhat prevalent, although they're more for drier areas, but you will see some. Okay, and there's going to be small rodent-like mammals. Okay, like red panda. Okay, and the three-toed sloth. But here's the thing about many of the animals in the rainforest. They live in the trees. They're what we call arboreal. You kind of have to if it's flooded all the time. Unless you're a fish, it's pretty hard to live at ground level. And you certainly don't have any burrowing subterranean animals. You don't want to live underground in a hole when it's flooded all the time. Okay? It's pretty tough to make a go of it. So you don't see a lot of gophers, okay, in the tropical rainforest because they don't do very well. Okay? But yeah, there's going to be lots of bugs, lots of birds, okay, because birds prey on bugs, lots of amphibians and things like that that prey on bugs. Bugs are sort of the middle part of all food chains, and food chains in the rainforest can be really, really long, right? There's your plants, your producers, and then there's tons of herbivores, herbivorous insects, some mammals, things like that. The three-toed sloth is a herbivore, okay? How many people have ever seen one of these? Okay? Their eyes are really close together. They're like weird to look at them. It just seems like there's something not right, okay? But they're pretty relaxed kinds of animals. They are the slowest mammal on Earth because they are not designed to walk on the ground. They're designed to shimmy along the branches of a tree. In fact, they've got claws that look like a coat hanger that you would put over top of like something in your closet, over a rod in the closet. That's how he's hanging there right now. Okay, is by these long claws, okay, that they use to just move along the tree. And they can actually sleep like that. They just hang out there, okay? And they sleep in the tree, and they pick leaves off, and they eat them, okay? But they don't have a lot of predators because there aren't a lot of large animals in the rainforest, certainly not ones that could climb the tree. So they don't have to be very fast. They don't need to run away from anything. Okay, other things about the animals is that there's high rates of extinction in the tropical rainforest because of all the human activity, because lots of species are endemic. That means they live in one spot. Only one spot in the entire world in the rainforest right there in a 100 by 100 meter area. Okay, that could be the extent of that species. So someone comes in and clear cuts that area, that species is extinct. Okay, so there's lots of endemic species in the rainforest. And that goes for plants as well. All right. Okay, chemical cycling again. So there's an idea of how thick is the rainforest, right? Very thick, and there's many different layers from the ground up. Lots of mosses and things like that. Okay, chemical cycling is rapid. You can see here that in the foreground of this picture, there's a tree laying on the ground. It's covered in moss. It isn't going to be long before that tree that's now circled with the color you can see, okay, is going to be gone. Right? They decompose really rapidly. Again, lots of mold, lots of bacteria, and lots of insects to decompose them very, very fast. Okay, the savanna, their second one. Right? The savanna gets as much rain as the rainforest does. Just gets it at, like, in the monsoon season. Right? So if you're in the savanna, there's going to be a monsoon season where there's torrential rain for months. And then it stops, and it's hot and dry for like 6 months. Okay? So the savanna, at times, is flooded and wet, and at other times is tinder dry. Okay? So fire is a big problem in the savanna as well. Okay? Because there's going to be seasons where you've got this huge amount of grassland, as you can see in this picture with the zebras, that is absolutely bleached white dry. Right? That could go up in flame very, very easily with a lightning strike or something like that. And they do. They have wide tracts of kind of like prairie fires, okay, that go on in the savanna. All right, so about 12% of the Earth's land area, okay, subtropical regions fringing on the rainforest. So you're going to see rainforest and savanna in similar places. Okay, it is a tropical grassland, not a true prairie like we have. It's a tropical grassland. So the grasses that grow there are a lot different. Okay. A few years ago, I had a student here who was from South Africa. He actually moved back a year and a half ago, but he was telling me about their house. And he said, yeah, when we go back to our house, we're going to have to like take out some scythes. Okay, that's a scythe is what, if you've ever seen what the Grim Reaper looks like, it's that long handled thing with the hooked blade on it. Okay, he said because the elephant grass will be over our house. And I'm like, you're kidding. Because I've been teaching people about elephant grass being, like 2 meters tall, whatever. He goes, no, they call it elephant grass because elephants hide in it. It's that tall. It'll grow over our house. So in order to get like in the door and stuff, we'll have to get a scythe and cut it down and walk around the house cutting down this elephant grass. It's kind of like bamboo. Okay, it's just not quite as hard, right? But it's very, very tall, and it isn't actually a grass. And so a herd of elephants can apparently wander through it, and you can't see them until they're right on top of you. Okay, so it's pretty wild stuff. But you can see here, there are some trees, but they tend to be in clumps, right? It's not a woodland biome by any means. Okay, there's some open woodland, but not like a forest. Okay, so the climate, as you can see here, we've got same temperature pattern as the tropical rainforest because this is a tropical climate. You only see them near the equator, and equatorial climates always have a flat temperature line because there's no difference in the amount of solar radiation they receive. But here's where the tropical rainforest and the savanna differ. High rainfall for several months and then practically none, right? If you remember, on our tropical rainforest one, the wettest month was like 200 millimeters, 250 millimeters. The wettest month here, 350 millimeters. Okay, that's 35 centimeters of rain in a month. Okay, that's a lot. And they get that for several months. Okay, so really, really wet. That's the monsoon season, and then they have the dry season. So they have seasons, just not summer and winter. Monsoon and dry. Okay, it's kind of what they have. Right? Human-induced wildfires are a big problem because obviously during those very, very dry months, okay, things can get pretty crispy. What is this thing that the cheetah is sitting on? It's a termite mound. Termites are everywhere in the savanna. Okay? And termites eat all things made of plants. Okay, so they'll eat, you have to, like, when they build houses in the savanna, they have to look at how do we keep termites out of here. In Canada, we're like, okay, how do we keep moisture and cold out? We don't have to worry about bugs so much. Okay, they have to worry about, I don't want termites in my house because if they come in here, my house will turn into sawdust. Literally, it'll turn into sawdust. That's how quickly they can take down, okay, anything made out of plant material. This whole mound is made of termite poop, sawdust. Okay, that's what they do. They eat solid pieces of food and they make these big mounds. Okay, this is basically like an anthill except it's full of termites. Okay, so when plants in the rainforest or in the savanna, make seeds, they have to make untold numbers of them because most of them will get eaten before they get a chance to germinate. Okay, there's just that much insect activity out there. Okay, lots of plants will have to estivate just like they do up here. They just estivate for a different reason. Up here they estivate because of cold. There they estivate because of drought. Right? So they have a season where they don't grow. They might lose their leaves and do nothing, okay, for a few months while the drought passes. Okay, if you just look at the average precipitation, like we said before, it's almost as much as the tropical rainforest, but it's about distribution. Okay, that's why you don't get a rainforest, you get a tropical grassland instead. All right, so vegetation, okay, you can see here that you get tall grasses. You do get some kind of scrubby type trees and bushes and things like that, but not forest kind of stuff. And the trees generally all have a similar shape, right? They tend to have kind of a crown or an umbrella type of shape, but there's two reasons for that. First off, if the crown is nice and high, most animals can't eat their leaves except giraffes. That's why they have long necks. But the other reason is if they're spread out like an umbrella, they provide shade for their roots. So they can shade the soil around their roots and it doesn't dry out as quickly and it preserves moisture. Okay? So there's another reason they have that kind of shape. Now, this is elephant grass in this picture right here. Right? You can see that it's not a matter of perspective. These trees are growing out of the elephant grass. Right? And they're reasonably tall trees. So elephant grass can get pretty tall. All right, so yeah, African elephant grass can reach heights of several meters. Okay, trees in the savanna are fire resistant. Okay, certain types of trees like eucalyptus trees can be burnt right down to the bark and they'll come back. Okay, their bark actually is full of air spaces that act as an insulator, and it actually protects the sap from boiling, and the plant will grow back even though all the foliage has burned off of it. Right, so there's lots of fire-resistant plants. Okay, so seeds rarely survive. They got to produce enormous numbers of seeds. Okay, savanna trees are xerophytes. That means they're drought tolerant. Okay, deep roots, flattened crowns. We talked about that already. Okay. All right, soils. Soils in the savanna actually look a lot like soils in the prairie. Thick A horizons, thick topsoil, because grass tends to do that. Every year grass dies and new grass grows up to replace it. So there's all the blades of grass from the previous year, okay, that have to decompose and they build up in the soil. Right? So you can see here, this is almost all A horizon. Right about here would be kind of where the B horizon starts. Right? And these are feet. So that's 2 feet worth of topsoil. Right? So lots. Okay? It's a bit sandier though in the savanna than it is in most places in the prairie, although we have fairly sandy soil here, okay, for prairie, but in the savanna it's quite a bit sandier. And that's based just basically on the rock types that are in that area. Okay, for the fauna, it's the exact opposite of the tropical rainforest. The tropical rainforest had really, really long food chains because there were so many bugs. And it's not that there aren't lots of bugs in the savanna, but they're not as important in the food chain. Food chains in the savanna tend to be short because the herbivores tend to be big. So if the animals that are directly eating the plants are big, the animals that eat them have to be big, and then there's not going to be other animals that eat those ones. So the food chains tend to go grass, herbivore, big carnivore, done. Okay, so they tend to be really, really short. Right? So you got lions, you know, that'll prey on wildebeests and zebras and things like that. You got the cheetahs and hyenas and all those kinds of animals. So large pack kind of hunting animals. Okay, so let me see here. Food chains are relatively short, okay, with very few secondary consumers. Okay, and there's lots of scavengers. Okay, buzzards, okay, tend to live in the savanna, and they're the ones that you can tell where something has died because they're circling it, waiting for the carnivores that are currently feeding on it to leave, and then they come down and feed on it. Or they circle it, waiting for it to die. If you're in the desert, that's always bad if buzzards are circling you, okay, because they tend to have a second or a sixth sense about that, when something's going to drop dead, so they can eat it. Okay, so if buzzards are circling you, suck it up, Buttercup, and keep fighting. Yeah. All right. We talked about having the flattened crowns. So this is very typical of the shape, okay, of savanna trees. The leaves are very high off the ground to keep animals from eating them, but also to provide lots of shade. You can see all the shade here, and all the animals are chilling out in the shade. Okay, so they stay out of the sun that way. Okay, the plants provide that, but aren't providing a lot of food because they've got that shape. Okay, this is what the savanna would look like just after the monsoon season. So lots of just standing water everywhere because of all the flooding that would occur. So sudden intense storms are characteristic, and they can result in a lot of erosion of unprotected areas, lots of just washing away of soil and stuff. Okay, and nutrient cycling is rapid because there's lots of like termites and decomposing insects there that will take care of that stuff. All right, the desert. So not all deserts are like what you'd see in Africa, which is like the dunes and the shifting sand and stuff like that. Actually, most deserts are like this. They're rocky and dry. All right, so this is like Chimney Rock, like Arizona, Utah, Nevada, that kind of area. Okay, whereas obviously the Sahara Desert is an equatorial desert. This is more of a mid-latitude desert, right? And so they are a bit different in their structure, being more rocky. Usually because of either a glacial retreat where the harder rock didn't break, or because of erosion, a river came through, and the same thing, this rock was harder than the surrounding rock, so it didn't erode. Okay. You get that too here if you go into a coulee, okay, in like southern Alberta or around Drumheller, you see the hoodoos, right? Well, they've always got those tops on them because that rock was harder than the rock underneath, and so it didn't erode. All right, so they cover about a third of the globe, and that's not good because you really can't do much in the desert in terms of like growth and stuff like that. Okay, obviously it's not a very productive area, but you can see that sometimes deserts can get cold. A mid-latitude desert can get snow. Flagstaff, Arizona has a ski hill. Right? In the wintertime, they get snow, okay? But obviously in the Sahara, they don't, okay? So if you've ever seen like Star Wars, okay, Tatooine and Jakku are all filmed in Tunisia, okay? That's true Saharan shifting sand kind of desert, okay? Whereas this is obviously a little bit different. What do they have in common? They're dry, okay? There's something all deserts have in common, really, really dry. They're not all necessarily hot, but they're very, very dry. All right, so if we're looking at a climatogram of a desert, okay, this is what we're going to see. A hot desert, equatorial desert's not going to have much change in temperature. If it's a mid-latitude desert, then we would have a bell curve. Okay, if it's a mid-latitude desert, it's going to be a summer and a winter, okay, except that we'd have this maybe closer to 0. Yeah, so temperature in degrees Celsius, yeah, so that's about right where I drew that, okay. Close to 0, probably maybe not a freezing desert, but something like that. And then obviously temperatures going up in the summer, but this wouldn't change. Okay, the distribution of rainfall would not change. Their wettest month here, okay, gets 40 millimeters or 50 millimeters of rain. About that much. Okay, so that's not very much, and that's the wettest month. There's a lot of months where there isn't even a bar, okay, which means they don't get any rain. Okay, some months of the year. All right. Sometimes deserts can look like this, a combination of kind of sand as well as rock, and you can see there are some green things growing there. Some stuff does grow in the desert. Okay, the saguaro cactus does fine, mesquite bushes do fine, okay, things like that. They just have to be very adapted to long periods without any water. Okay, so we get rain shadow deserts like the Mojave, okay, or you get equatorial deserts like the Baja is more of an equatorial desert simply because the winds that come off the ocean there are hot and dry. And then you got rain shadows like the one behind the Gobi Desert is the one that's behind the Himalayas. Okay. So again, this is more of a mid-latitude desert. This is Arizona. You see lots of kind of scrubby looking plants, okay, very xerophytic, and then you've got your saguaro cactus, okay. The saguaro cactus, if you see one that's got lots of arms, it's very old. A saguaro cactus won't grow its first arm until it's between 80 and 100 years old, okay? And then it grows one arm about every 10 or 15 years after that. So they have to be pretty old to have lots and lots of arms, and some of them have lots of arms. I've seen like one that had like almost a dozen arms on it. So it's, yeah, they grow pretty weird sometimes. Okay, so some plants reduce water through evaporation by controlling their rates of transpiration. Others have long dormant periods, so they estivate. Okay, most of these cacti are what we call C4 plants or CAM plants. That is, they carry out the water requiring reactions of photosynthesis at night, where they will evaporate less. They'll do the energy capturing parts obviously during the day. Okay, saguaro cactus has widespread roots, okay, whereas mesquite bushes have deep tap roots that can access like groundwater and things like that. So there's different ideas on how to compete in the desert. But look at the space between the plants in the desert. Okay, I mean that tells you there's a lot of competition for resources. If a seed falls right here, it's probably not going to do well because this plant's probably got roots that expand that far, okay, and it's pulling moisture and stuff from that area. So you're not going to see plants that are closely grouped unless there's a spring. You do sometimes see that if there's a spring in an area or water's coming out of the ground, then you have kind of a little oasis and plants grow really close together there. Okay, soils. There's basically no topsoil in the desert. Okay, topsoil is built up from the remains of decomposing plants and animals. And there aren't many of those, so you just don't get much. And it's always dry, so if a wind comes up, all that organic material dries up and blows away. Okay, so it just doesn't get a chance to build up much topsoil. That's why we see the A horizon is very small, the B horizon is quite big, and the C horizon is basically gravel. Okay, it's all just crushed, well-eroded rock. Hey, the animals that live in the desert have to be adapted to hot. Okay, it's going to be hot and it's going to be dry. So a lot of animals are nocturnal. Okay, they only come out at night when it's cooler. Okay, some animals, okay, like reptiles may have a very hard skin that prevents evaporation. There's lots of bugs, same idea, a hard carapace that prevents evaporation. You're not going to see a lot of like slugs and things like that because they would just like burn to a crisp. So there's lots of bugs and small rodents. You're not going to see really big mammals with the exception of maybe a fox, okay, but a camel would obviously be an exception, okay, a large animal that lives in the desert. But they kind of wander between oases. If they don't reach an oasis, they can still die of thirst in the desert. So, but small rodents, they stay underground, right? They stay underground where it's cool. They don't require a lot of water. Antelope are a good example. An antelope may go its entire life without drinking water, okay, if they eat cactus instead. Okay? If you ever get a chance, okay, the inside of an antelope's mouth is like tanned shoe leather. It's just hard, okay? So they can clamp right down on a cactus and it just breaks the thorns off. They don't even stick inside to their tongue or to their mouth, okay? It's just really hard in there, so they can eat cactus and get lots of moisture out of that. So lots of adaptability if you're gonna live in a place like this. Now, in order to cool yourself, would sweating be a good way to cool yourself in the desert? No, because you're gonna die of thirst. You're gonna dehydrate really, really quickly. So you don't have a lot of sweating animals in the desert, okay? Example, this rabbit, you can see the blood vessels in its ear here, okay? What a hair like that will do is it will send a lot of blood into those capillaries, those small blood vessels in the ear, and then it'll flap the ear, okay? And that creates kind of a cooling effect on the blood that's in the ear, and so cooler blood goes back into the body, okay? It doesn't require any water, but it helps to cool the animal, okay? Your dog or cat, when they get hot, pant. And what they do is when they're panting, they're evaporating moisture off the inside of their throat, which is right next to the carotid artery. Okay, so that cools the blood that's going to the brain. Okay, and so they get this sense that they are cooler as their blood is being cooled by the panting process. Panting obviously doesn't require as much moisture as sweating does, so it's more water conserving than that. Other animals just don't regulate their body temperature. Okay, snakes. Okay? They don't have any way to regulate their body temperature. Whatever it is outside, that's what they are. Right? That's why they come out in the morning and sun themselves on the rocks. Okay? We don't have a big problem with it here, but the further south in Alberta you go, you'll start to see a lot more rattlesnakes. Yeah, when I was a kid, I lived down in Foremost and Bow Island, these two southern places between Medicine Hat and Lethbridge. We'd come out in the morning and the snakes would be on the sidewalk. And they'd be sunning themselves on the sidewalk. So you always kept a flat shovel just outside the door on the porch, because when you came outside, you had to get rid of them. Yeah, okay. Flat shovel. Don't use a spade. You want a flat shovel because you want to be able to cut their head off. Okay, and you don't want to miss. Okay, with a spade, you only get the point, right? About this much. With a flat shovel, a much better chance. Now, if the snake gets coiled, don't try and cut the head off. Okay. That's what the flat part of the shovel is for. You smoke them and then they spread out, right? Because they get kind of dazed and they uncoil and then you can get the head off. Okay, yeah. So if you ever run into a rattlesnake, okay, these are important things to know. You're actually not allowed to kill a rattlesnake in Alberta because they're a protected species, but it was always a him or me. Yeah, it's him or me. Yeah. So it's kind of dangerous, but yeah, you got to watch out for that. Incidentally, back on the rattlesnake thing, watch out for the head. Okay? It'll still bite you even after you cut it off. Yeah, watch out for that. Yeah, and the fangs still have venom in them, so if you scratch yourself with the fangs, okay, you can still get the poison in you. Okay, so you do have to watch out for that. And the fangs are hard. Okay, we actually had one that struck at the tire of our car while we were driving, and it punctured. Okay? It punctured the side wall of a car tire. Okay? That was kind of a funky thing. You get out of the car and you look and this snake stuck to the tire. Okay? Yeah. Most of the time, snakes will just go away, a rattlesnake. But if they're molting, has anyone ever seen a snake molt? Okay? When they shed their skin, it comes up over their head and they can't see and they can't their tongue kind of tells them about heat and scent and stuff like that. That doesn't work very well for them, so they strike at anything. That's when they're especially dangerous, when they're molting and their skin is up over their head. Okay? So you got to watch out for them in that time. Most of the time you can just kind of encourage them to leave with the bottom of the shovel, but never poke at them with a stick. because they can go right up the stick when they strike. Okay, and they're quick. Okay, enough about snakes. Flies, scorpions, crickets, less harmful things that you can eat if you want to, okay, are also prime inhabitants because, again, they don't require a lot of moisture. Okay, and then there's areas like this desert, which is just scorched, okay? There's really not going to be much there, okay? Not a lot of plants, not a lot of animals, okay? It's basically just a blasted wasteland, okay? But soil erosion is a big concern because it's so dry, you know, stuff can just get picked up and blown away. But nutrient cycling is pretty slow. You need moisture for that, and you need bugs and things like that. I mean, there are some bugs, but they're not enough there to do a lot of decomposition. Okay, now, temperate grassland is the next one here. Now, you look at that picture and you're probably thinking, that doesn't look like a prairie, that looks like the desert we were just looking at. Well, sometimes a prairie can look like a desert, and they often border on each other. But this was actually taken just north of Medicine Hat. Okay? It's a short grass prairie, which is the driest kind. Okay? Short grass prairie, there's lots of prickly pear cactus, okay, in the foreground here, lots of it. Okay? Lots of rock there. It's hot and dry. Obviously, through the summer, you know, they don't get a whole lot of rain down in that part of the province. But there's still grass, right? So it is still a grassland biome. There's a lot of variation within the grassland biome. There's mixed grass prairie or long grass prairie, and then there's short grass prairie, and there's a lot of transition in between, and they look a lot different. Okay, so it's important, this biome's important for farming, okay, because most of our food crops are modified grasses, or they're in the grass family, okay, so they produce the seeds that we grind for flour and things like that. So they're grass and herb-dominated vegetation types. Yeah, but typically there's going to be now seasonality. Okay, that means on your climatogram you're going to have a bell curve, right? This is Calgary's biome right here, or sorry, Calgary's climatogram and Calgary's biome. Okay, we can see obviously a temperature spike through the summer months, also a rainfall spike through the summer months, with June being our wettest month. Okay. We don't get that whole April showers bring May flowers thing. That's a much more southern expression. Okay, here it's more like May showers bring the weeds in June, or something. Okay, but yeah, it's more like that because obviously June is our wettest month. That's when we get the majority of our thunderstorms and things like that. Okay, but you can see that the big thing with prairies is that rainfall follows temperature. Right? We get precipitation, just not rain, in the wintertime, but snow doesn't represent nearly as much moisture as rain does. In fact, 10 centimeters of snow melts down to 1 centimeter of rain equivalent. Right? Because snow is full of all those air pockets that we talked about, okay, before when we were talking about the quinzies and things like that in the podcast that you guys watched there in lesson 2. Sorry, lesson 3. Okay? So yeah, it doesn't provide nearly as much moisture. This is short grass prairie. So this is deep south Alberta, okay? Medicine Hat, Lethbridge, those kind of places. Okay? Very, very short grass, and it's dormant already. Okay? This picture was taken in early August, right? So it is already beyond, okay, where it was actively growing. It's gone kind of that bleached color where it's dormant now. Right? So they experience significant soil moisture deficit. That means they're going to lose a lot of water and not get enough rain to replace it. Okay? Long period of drought in late summer. Okay, that's probably what prevents trees from growing in these areas, although you will see clumps of, or groves of trees periodically where there's probably a spring, okay, or something like that, or a depression where water may collect, okay, when it does fall. All right, here's a comparison. This is a mixed grass prairie on the right. We can see it's a lot greener, and the grasses are a lot different and taller, and there's flowers and stuff in it. Okay, these two pictures are taken only a few days apart. Okay, this is in St. Paul, Alberta, so much further north. Okay, and it was taken the first week of August. This was taken the second week of August in the same year. Right, so obviously much different in terms of the moisture that's available, and then much different in the types of grasses that grow there. Okay, up here we have like creeping red fescue, crested wheatgrass, things that grow fairly tall, sometimes even thigh high. Okay, kind of grasses. Where you just don't get that here in the short grass prairie. That's why it's called short grass. It's like spear grass, grama grass, things like that that are very small and close to the ground. Okay, all right. right, soils. Here's the big thing. Like the savanna, grass builds up topsoil because every year the grass dies and new grass grows to replace it. So the roots and the leaf litter build up and make a nice big A horizon. And there's not a lot of flooding or things like that to wash it away. Also, the roots of grass hold soil in place, right? Which is why a lot of farmers now have adopted a zero-till approach to farming. That is, they never just plow up their land and leave it dirt. Okay? Because if they do, it can dry out, erode, and it'll blow away in the wind like it did during the Depression. Okay, like in the 30s, right? They had the big dust bowl kind of storms and stuff because they did a lot of that. Whereas now, okay, they approach this and they don't till it up. They'll seed it, okay, but they won't till it. All right, the B horizon is not very big. Okay, because there's not going to be a lot of small particulates, okay, like clay that's going to collect in this biome. So the B horizon's going to be small, and if you ever get to the B horizon when digging a hole here, it's full of rocks also. Okay, you get to the parent material fairly quickly through the B horizon. Now, does that say that every place in the prairie is like this? No. Okay, I know when we were building our house and they were digging out the hole for our house. Okay, they went through about this much topsoil, maybe about a foot, and then they were right into the bedrock, okay, right into the bedrock of the sandstone, and they were actually breaking up the rocks. They pulled several rocks that were like the size of a Volkswagen, okay, out of the hole that was going to be our basement. Okay, so sometimes the C horizon can be quite close to the top. It was a real problem when I wanted to build my fence, because you have to drill, auger holes down to put the fence posts in. I was only able to go down this far before I hit the bedrock. Okay, it's kind of hard to dig through that. So some places are going to have thinner soils than others, mostly because there's an outcropping of sandstone where my house is. Okay, other places, my other house in Okotoks, I was digging down 3 feet, no problem. Okay, so it all depends kind of on where you are. Okay, temperate grasslands, the fauna, which is the animals. What's wrong with this picture? There's no animals. Well, guess what? The natural animals that live on the prairie aren't there anymore. Okay? The prairie is one of the most heavily modified of all biomes because we use it for agriculture. Okay? So, one of the main animals that should be here is bison. Bison and buffalo. Right? You go back 200 years on the prairie and there would have been herds numbering in the tens of thousands of buffalo. Right? And they had a lawnmower effect on southern Alberta because they're a migratory animal. They eat so much that they have to keep moving or they'll starve. Okay, so they eat in one area and they cut the grass right down to the ground. Almost looks like a golf green, okay, where they've been. Okay? And then they just move on and they cut these big swaths of prairie down as they go. Well, if you're eating that much grass, you're competing with the domesticated animals, cattle, sheep, okay, things like that. You're taking their food. And, well, if you've ever had bison, it's yummy. Okay? And so they were desirable for food. They were also undesirable for competition with our domesticated animals, so they were eliminated. Okay? Sometimes by actively hunting, and other times because we fenced off farming areas. And even though bison are big and mean and could easily go through a barbed wire fence, they're not very smart. And they would run into a fence and go, oh, and then they would just turn around and go back the other way and actually starve to death. Okay? Because they wouldn't go through the fences and they would just stay in the area that they'd already chewed down to the ground and run out of food. Okay? Now, I say bison aren't very smart. You don't want to mess with one though, right? They're big, aggressive animals. And, the natives used to hunt them. How? How did they used to hunt them? Yeah, they'd run them off of a cliff. Okay? Now, yeah, head smashed in buffalo jump. If you ever look at a bison, it's not going to look you in the eye, at least not with both of them, because the eyes are on the side of the head. So all you have to do is stay to their side and kind of be big and, or maybe wear, like a wolf skin so you look kind of like a wolf, and they'll always turn away from you. So you can funnel them towards a cliff, and they won't see the cliff coming because they can't, there's a cone in front of them where they can't see. Okay? So as long as you keep them distracted on the sides, they just run right off the cliff. Okay? They're not, like I said, they're not very bright. Okay? Now, if they see you and they're not scared or they start to get aggressive, they'll turn and then you can get trampled. Okay? And they're, you know, a herd of 1,000 bison could probably do a pretty good job on you if you didn't get out of the way, right? So, you know, they weren't something that was hunted easily. They were something that was hunted with great planning and care, especially prior to the advent of the rifle, right? The native people, you know, for hundreds of years hunted them that way. You're not taking them down with a spear and a bow and arrow, right? They're just too big unless you were willing to spend 100 arrows on one, okay? But yeah, you had to run them basically off a cliff until we brought rifles in, and that really made it kind of unfair. It became a lot less sporting, okay, at that point. All right, other things that should be here, okay? Bears. Okay, we don't see many bears on the prairie anymore. They used to be here. Okay, used to be here a lot, but we got rid of them because they ate our animals, and that's not good. So we shot them all. Okay, and we moved them right off the prairie. Now you don't really see them until you get into the parks near the mountains because we can't hunt them there. So they don't go around there, right? So we don't see them as much. Same with wolves. There used to be lots of wolves on the prairie, but again, they get into people's chicken coops or take down their cattle, and so we got rid of them, and you don't see them very much. So a lot of the natural fauna of the prairies is gone. The ones that have remained have done very well. Gophers. Okay? Gophers do great because there's lots for them to eat, and now a lot of their predators are gone. Their only natural predator that's left is the coyote. Okay, maybe a fox if a fox is especially quick. Okay, those would be their two natural predators. And hawks, of course, hawks and eagles, but there's a lot less of those as well. Okay, we don't see nearly as many of the predatory birds of prey as we used to. So there's a lot of change on the prairie. Most of the animals on the prairie now are the domesticated type. Okay, chemical cycles, they're fairly rapid for a mid-latitude or northern climate, but again, there's a distinct winter here, and during the winter, stuff doesn't decompose. So it takes a lot longer for nutrients to cycle here than they would in, let's say, the savanna, where there's more bugs and a full year's worth of time to work on things. All right, the temperate, deciduous, broadleaf, evergreen, sclerophyllous forest biome. I'm actually combining the Mediterranean climate and the temperate deciduous in here. Yeah. No. Okay. So you can see here deciduous trees, right? Leafy trees that are going to lose their leaves every fall, okay? And you can see also on the foreground here, there's a lot of decomposing leaf litter because every year all the leaves fall to the ground, which can make for very productive soil. The problem is it's not really good for agriculture because the amount of work involved in clearing it. It's easy to clear a prairie, you just plow it. But you can't just walk into the forest and plow it. You got to cut down the trees, pull the stumps. Okay, it's a lot more work in order to make this agricultural. So it's more, if it's used for anything, it's more for lumber and pulp. Okay, climatogram. Temperature is a little different. It's still a bell curve shape like it is for the prairies, but it doesn't typically get as cold as the prairies. You can see here the temperature line kind of flirts with that freezing mark, but doesn't really cross it, okay, for much of the year. So it's a much more temperate climate than the prairie is because they don't have as severe winters. The other big difference, look at the pattern of rainfall. Where on the prairie, there was a definite match to the bell curve with the shape of the precipitation bars. Here, the precipitation bars are pretty level, which means every month they get about the same amount of rain. That's how you build up a forest without long periods of drought. If you have long periods of drought, you're not going to get big trees because they can't store water. Okay, so you're going to have much more even rainfall. That's kind of the deciding climatogram feature for a deciduous forest. Okay, a definite bell curve that flirts with the freezing mark, and then very even rainfall across the board. All right, so like we said, mild winters, moderate precipitation, that is nearly constant. No extended dry periods and short winters. Okay, vegetation, temperate forests are dominated by deciduous trees, oak, beech, hickory, okay, understory trees like birch, hazel, sycamore, and maple, okay, broadleaf evergreen forests are in more humid areas, okay, so you might have magnolias in places like that and even some types of palm. Okay. Sclerophyllous forest biomes are more the Mediterranean type of climate, and they're going to have drought-tolerant species like olive, sessile oak, and some pine. And then, like tropical forests, there is layering. just not 8 layers. So there's like an undergrowth, an understory, and a canopy, maybe 3 or 4 layers in the most dense of these kinds of forests. But they still have that layering, which you can kind of see here. Okay, we've got our undergrowth, and then this is kind of our canopy up here, and then there might be some shorter trees that are kind of filling the gap in between. Okay, competition for light's a big factor. You got to get tall or be tolerant of being shaded, one of the two. Okay, soils, you get a pretty good A horizon in these kind of biomes because every year you get a whole bunch of leaf litter to decompose. The problem with that is it's layer upon layer of the leaf litter, and it can get a bit anaerobic, which means without oxygen in the lower levels of that decomposing layer, and sometimes the decomposition will stall, especially through the winter and the cold months. Okay, B horizon, lots of clay. C horizons, kind of Canadian Shield kind of rock, right? At least in Canada. All right, the food chains, they're typically a bit shorter, right? Because there's a lot of herbivores, okay? Some of them big, moose and elk and deer, okay? And some of them small rodents like, squirrels and mice and things like that. There's going to be some subterranean animals that live in this because it's not as wet as a tropical rainforest, so their holes won't flood, okay? And then there's a lot of secondary consumers in the temperate deciduous forest. Okay, secondary consumers are ones that are carnivorous or maybe omnivorous. Okay, eating our herbivores, and then there's going to be our top carnivores like lynx and wolf, okay, and things like that that nothing else preys on. Okay, but again, still fairly short, not like the tropical rainforest that would have like 30 levels. Okay. All right, and our chemical cycling, okay, I mean, it's faster than the prairie because there's more moisture and a more mild winter, but it's not anything like the tropical climates, right? There's still some molds and bacteria and things like that that can grow here because of the shade and the moisture, okay, but there is still a cold winter period that's going to stall that cycling. All right, the taiga. I'm starting to flirt with the end of the class here. Okay, so in the taiga is like that carpet of trees you see. If you go into like Banff or Kananaskis and it's like all these spruce trees laid out in front of you, that's the taiga. Okay? It's a dry forest. Right? Pine trees, coniferous trees do not require nearly as much water as deciduous trees because their leaves are the needles. And the needles are small, covered in a very thick, waxy cuticle. They don't lose them every year, so they don't have to regrow them. Okay? And they can go dormant with their leaves on, okay, during the winter time. So they require a lot less moisture, which is good because they get a lot less moisture. And again, we said that a big problem with that is that there's going to be a lot of wildfires. Okay? Wildfires prevalent under warm conditions, which is what we had this spring province-wide. A warm, dry spring. Okay? The snow was gone by the end of February instead of the middle of April. And as a result, okay, with no precipitation in the interim, things got dry, really dry. Okay? All right. Now, the taiga is, or was, at least relatively untouched because it's very rugged. The entire biome is very, very rugged kind of territory. But we have found, of course, that there's a lot of natural resources in the taiga. And I don't just mean all the lumber that's present in the trees. This is where you find oil sands. Okay? Oil sands, natural gas deposits, things like that. Okay? A lot of that is found in the taiga, both in North America and in Asia. If you go to Russia, Russia's got huge reserves of oil, just like we do, okay, under kind of the same kind of territory. All right. Climate. Taiga has a very distinctive climatogram. The temperature curve is abrupt. Okay? The highest point on the temperature curve, okay, is going to be between 10 and 15 degrees. And the lowest point is going to be really low, like -30 or lower. So we said this one has the biggest temperature fluctuation of any biome. Right? Very hard winters, mild summers, okay, but a big fluctuation. And you can see here, rainfall is scarce, especially through the spring. Right, so April, May, okay, not a lot of most of the moisture comes in August and September and October. And you can see here, wettest month, okay, you're looking at 60 millimeters of rain, maybe 70. right? But there is a long time through the winter and spring here with no precipitation, and that's why we typically get wildfires in the taiga in the springtime, okay, as opposed to later in the year when they're going to get more moisture, right? Winter can persist 50 to 70% of the year, usually more like 70. Okay, it can be cold for most of the year until the sun is out for long periods. Okay, snow collects on the ground, and in the spring it flows over frozen soil. So if the soil is still frozen, how much of that gets absorbed? None. Okay, so it just flows over the frozen soil and runs off into the rivers and stuff. So it doesn't get a lot of it into the soil for the plants. Okay, some of the coldest temperatures on Earth are in the taiga. Okay, minus 50 degrees. Okay, if it gets below minus 50, you can tell. If you spit, it'll freeze before it hits the ground, and it'll make a cracking sound. Yeah. So if you ever think it's close to minus 50, hock a loogie. Okay, you can test it out. All right, vegetation. Very, very low species diversity. I mean, you look at this forest here, and what do we see? We see some like fir trees, some black spruce, some Engelmann spruce, and some lodgepole pine. Like 4 different kinds of trees. And then some undergrowth, some grass, and maybe a few like rose bushes and stuff, wild rose bushes, right? But not much in terms of diversity, okay? So very, very little different types of plants. Okay? You will see some larch in some areas, okay? Kananaskis has several places where you can see larch. Larch is a deciduous pine tree. They look really cool in October when their needles are all like a bright fluorescent orange, and they actually drop them and then grow new ones in the spring. They're a really cool looking plant, actually. Okay. All right, soils, they're cold because again, winter persists, and because there's lots of trees, the soil stays shaded for long periods of time. So it's gonna, the soils aren't typically gonna be very thick, and they're gonna be frozen a lot of the year, okay? So they're kind of nutrient poor, which is why, again, the trees are fairly widely spaced and tolerant of those kind of conditions. All right, the animals that live in the taiga have to be tolerant or have some way to adapt to long, cold winters. Many of them migrate. That is, they take off for the winter. They go somewhere else. Some of them will go dormant, okay, like the ground squirrel. Okay? A ground squirrel can basically turn off its metabolism. Okay, when they get into they roll into a ball like this, their body temperature will drop to below 10 degrees Celsius. Their heart beats a couple of times per minute. They breathe maybe once per minute. If you were to pick one up, you'd think it was dead, because it would be this cold, hard little ball. Okay, but periodically they wake up and they spend about a half an hour just shivering to get their body temperature back up. Then they go and eat some of the seeds that they stored, and they go back to sleep. Okay, these are a true hibernator. Bears are not a true hibernator. They're just lazy. Okay, all through the winter they just kind of chill in their den. Okay, but they don't lower their metabolic rate. These ones lower their metabolic rate, which is a true hibernator. Okay, wolverines, okay, are an example of another thing that lives in the taiga. Not so much, in Alberta or anything, but if you get further north, the Yukon, Alaska, there's wolverine. Okay, very prized for their pelts, but they're like a grizzly bear concentrated down into an animal the size of a German Shepherd. You do not want to mess with one. Okay, they will rip you apart, so you want to leave them alone. Okay, big part of life in the taiga, if you don't hibernate in the winter, is use of snow for insulation. Right, the snow pack, as long as it stays not packed, oddly enough, okay, it has lots of airspace in it, and it's a good insulator. That's why building a quinzhee works. You make a pile of snow, you hollow it out, and all the air spaces in there act as an insulator. You can actually get the temperature above freezing inside. Okay, if it gets packed, all the air gets forced out and it won't insulate. All right, we'll finish that tomorrow.